Hey, my Be Health Empowered family. Welcome back to another episode of Excuse Me, Doctor. My name is Dr. Melissa Clark. I am delighted that you have joined me this week. Those of you in my Be Health Empowered family already know to call me Dr. Mel. I'm good with that. And we're just delighted that you are here because you're interested in what we have to offer, which is making sure that you all, our listening audience, have the information that you need to make wise health decisions, not just for yourself, but also for your family and for your community. And if you're newbies tuning in for the first time, please hit that like button. If you're listening to us on Facebook and viewing us on Facebook, and hit that subscribe button, that red button on YouTube, if that's where you're checking us out. So always remember, please put your questions in the chat because we are here to answer them, to get your commentary, to see what you're thinking about. So please make sure that you interact with us and put them in as they occur to you, because we're doing it on a first come, first serve basis. And on that note, I have to welcome my wonderful co-host, Mr. Wayne Bruce. Wayne, come on into the studio. How you
Dr.
doing?
Mel. It's a one-on-one thing. My collar is messed up, Dr. Mel. I don't know.
Uh-oh.
I'm
Uh-oh.
having.
See.
Is Mercury in retrograde? I just
Yes,
need.
of course it is.
That's that's
Yeah,
what
we
it
got a few
is.
more days. I don't know when it's coming out, but we got a few more days. So,
It needs to come out quick. I mean,
yeah,
things are popping
yeah.
off. What's the deal?
Hold tight. But we are going to create an amazing week for ourselves,
L-
regardless of what
Regardless,
Mercury is doing. So, what are we talking about today on the show? Remind me.
obesity
That's
and its
right.
effects. I mean, where you live, will it have an effect on you being obese? So look, it's a subject that is near and dear to me because I'm a big man.
Well, the good thing is that we have an obesity expert, and she's also a cardiologist who is going to help us understand what are leading the runaway rates of obesity worldwide. I think there was just a study that came out that said over half the world's population is going to be obese by 2035. That's like less than
Wow.
15 years from now. So
Wow,
we
that's
need to
incredible.
understand, yeah, we need to understand what's driving this, like you said, what the role is of where we live and other factors and what's driving this and what we can do, most importantly. So I hope y'all are tuning in and you're sharing it with everybody you know, because this
I
is going to be like a dynamic show.
Yeah, I think everybody needs to share this. Everybody needs to hear this message, and I mean, it's near and dear. I heard in my family there's several people who were considered morbidly obese, and
Mm,
they got into people just saying, they had like willpower, all kinds of things. So I want to get into that with her, but
yes,
I want
absolutely.
you, Dr. Mel, to get into it with her. You know,
Yeah,
I want.
we're going to be asking questions. It's going to be a great discussion. So,
Oh,
but before we get to that, we
mhm.
have to do our weekly recap, right?
We have to do the
What's up with
recap.
that?
We got to do the recap. Here we go, Dr. Mel.
All right.
Here we go.
Let's bring it
Woo.
on. We got a lot to talk about.
This this here is a lot to talk about. Look, let's start with the beginnings. The
Okay.
sky's the limit, but just for interest rates and STDs.
Right. Yeah. It turns out that sexually transmitted infection, so they don't call them diseases anymore, it's
Okay.
called STIs.
STIs.
STIs are skyrocketing. 2021 data show that gonorrhea, syphilis, um, and syphilis that's being passed to babies if the mom has it, are soaring above pre-pandemic levels. And you know, syphilis alone, the cases jumped 32% since 2020. I mean, it's like
Wow.
unheard of.
So who's getting it? Who? I mean,
So half of the folks getting it are teens and young adults age 15 to 24. But that means that half the other people are older than that and should probably know better in terms of practices that help to keep you safe, right?
mhm. Right.
Um, and
What
there are
about black
multiple
people?
reasons. Well, yeah, actually 31%, unfortunately, of cases are among Black people, although we're only 13% of the population. And there, again, just like obesity, there are a lot of factors that play a role in this rate of STIs
What?
jumping.
Why the big jump? What happened? What?
So one thing is they've been decreasing STI program funding, sexually transmitted infection program funding and access. So COVID was a big part of that. Everybody, COVID sucked all the air out of the room. So there was a pulling back on STI screening, treatment, and prevention because, we're trying to put out the fire of COVID. But there was also parallel pulling back on funding for education about HIV prevention.
Wow.
Um, then we see in school this trend of limiting sex education. That's especially relevant for that, 50% of teens and young adults actually um, getting the being a part of this rise in STIs. And so what happens is when you don't have formalized sex education, kids get information from each other, right? And then finally, stigma and talking about it, talking with your parents, talking about prevention, all that stuff.
So, what are the resources we can use to get this information out and really help stem this tide?
So if you're a parent or if you're a young adult and you want more information, the American Sexual Health Association and the CDC both have great resources. They also have resources for the LGBTQ community, and all the resources cover things like how to talk to your partners about sexual health, navigate stigma, have respectful relationships, consent, sexual violence, and of course, STI prevention.
Yeah. Wow. It's needed. Needed.
Yes,
This
it
is
is.
crazy.
Absolutely.
So let's flip the script because we've been talking about health and obesity and all this stuff tonight. Fruits and veggies are less nutritious now.
So, yeah, there was an article in Nature that said that compared to decades ago,
Mhm.
many fruits, vegetables, and grains that are grown today carry fewer nutrients like calcium, iron, and phosphorus, for example. But there are many more.
So basically, what our grandparents ate was healthier than what we eat.
It seems like that's the case. And so, what it might lead to is people feeling full, but
Mhm.
being less healthy because their food is calorie rich, but nutrition poor.
So not
Um,
nutrient dense food.
exactly right. But there's hope because there's, changing farming methods that can help to reverse the decline in nutrients, especially farms that are embracing something called regenerative farming practices. But we really, need to get back to a place where our fruits and veggies are giving us the nutrients that we need.
We really do. I mean, I don't know. Everybody was talking about GMOs for so long,
Yeah.
that
And
maybe
that's part of the issue with wheat. Yeah.
right,
The
right.
wheat is
So
more has more calories, but less nutrients in terms of the way that it was genetically modified.
yeah, we probably have to eat more veggies now and still not get the same nutrients that our grandparents got, you know.
Right.
Right.
Exactly.
So look, next one has every male in the in our audience excited. I'm just saying.
Okay.
You wait, you want to tell me that Viagra can help another organ?
Yep. It turns out that there is evidence that for men who have heart disease and erectile dysfunction, the two most popular medications for erectile dysfunction are ED, which are Viagra, also called sildenafil, and Cialis, also called tadalafil, really seem to actually reduce the likelihood of progression to heart attacks, heart failure, and death after 5 years as compared to men who take neither drug. Cialis or tadalafil seemed to actually be the one that had the more impact, had the greater impact on these endpoints. And the thing is that these medications work by increasing blood flow. So if they're working to increase blood flow to the penis, they're working to increase blood flow elsewhere in your body where it's needed. So that might be the mechanism for the protective effect that they're seeing.
Wow. So that whole thing with the color purple, how'd he die? On top.
Not
It's
what
a
I was.
scene, everybody, from the color purple. Go see the color purple if you have not seen
I'm
it.
pretty sure just about everybody has seen it.
Right, right.
So yes, exactly. That might have been
Cool.
prevented
Cool. So
with
I want to
Cialis.
move on. not not putting anything. It's a men's episode so far because we deal with obesity. I mean STIs, learning something new. Now
Women
Viagra.
are affected by all this. So
Yeah, yeah. But this next one is about young men though and the
true,
cannabis use. Talk to us,
true.
Dr. Mel.
So there was a new study that confirms that there's a robust link between cannabis use and schizophrenia. Happens among men and women, but young men specifically are especially susceptible to uh, having schizophrenia from cannabis abuse, right? So that's having cannabis use disorder, having an addiction to marijuana. And they estimate that about 15% of cases of schizophrenia among young men could be prevented by avoiding cannabis use. That's pretty significant. So, you know, as access to potent cannabis products, and remember, the cannabis that's available now is actually more powerful than the cannabis of yesteryear. So, as these products and access to them continue to explode, this might become more of a problem down the line.
So you mean to tell me our fruits and veggies are less potent and our
But our
cannabis is
cannabis,
more potent?
yeah, yeah,
So
pretty
all
much.
you people who consider yourself not young anymore, not a young man or woman, don't get out here, run out here trying this new cannabis because it will put you on your head. And
Right.
and
Well,
but that leads us to this, Dr. Mel. That leads us
mhm.
to our question. You want our new
Go
segment?
ahead. Our new segment. What y'all think from you? And that was our co-host Larisha, who can't be with us tonight, but she graciously tuned in just to say that. What
Just
do
to say
y'all think?
that Larisha came on just to say that it's hilarious. I just can't stop listening to it. So the question, let's get to the question. Given the potential medical effects of marijuana, the medical effects of marijuana are still being discovered. What y'all think about the move to legalize it? We want to hear what you have to say in the comments. So, like I said, given the potential medical effects of marijuana, what y'all think about the move to legalize it? We want to hear
Right.
from you, right? We
Right.
want to
And the
hear it.
fact that these are still
What y'all
being
think?
and the fact that these are still being discovered, right? Like this
Right.
study that we just talked about with the association with addiction to cannabis and schizophrenia, especially in young men, that wasn't known before, right?
Right.
So we're about to moving to legalize something that does have positive effects, but for those people who misuse and abuse it, might have some serious consequences. So we want to know what y'all think about the move to
What y'all think?
there you go, to legalize marijuana. And on that note, has anybody put anything in the chat yet, or we need to come
Nothing.
back to them later?
Nothing. We'll come back to it later, but we want to know what you think about legalizing marijuana. We want to think.
All
We-
right.
I see you in a minute, Dr. Mel.
All right. Thanks so
Uh,
much, Wayne. We are going to move on with the main topic for our show tonight. Calories in, calories out. That's the basis of weight gain, right? Or not? Overweight and obesity is an epidemic, and it's much more complex than just that. So, there are a bunch of reasons here in the United States. We're going to break down this disease called obesity, the factors that impact it, and what needs to change. And to do that, we have a wonderful guest, Dr. Tiffany Powell Wiley. She's a cardiologist and scientist and an advocate. And she runs the Social Determinants of Obesity and Cardiovascular Risk Laboratory at the National Institutes of Health, National Heart, Lung, and Blood Institute. There, she focuses on community based approaches to addressing key social determinants of obesity. Welcome, Dr. Powell Wiley. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks so much, Dr. Mel. Thanks for having me this evening. I've learned some things just being here, just hearing what's going on from the rundown.
Well, we're gonna be doing the what y'all think with just you right now. So
Oh, don't ask me that right now.
well, we were gonna find out what you're thinking about obesity. First, I want to kick off with what caused you to focus on obesity and the factors that impact it. What got you interested in this?
Sure. So, when I started in my training for cardiology, it was about 10 or almost 20 years ago. So I don't want to date myself too much. But at that time, we were just starting to see the impacts of obesity rates in cardiovascular medicine. I was starting to take care of patients who were having heart attacks when they were at young ages, in their 30s. They were having heart failure at that age. And a lot of it had to do with not only some limited access to healthcare, but also untreated diabetes. And a lot of that was related to obesity. And so that was around the time that even within the research community, we were starting to put those connections together between the facts that obesity and excess body fat or excess adiposity had a direct connection to how the heart functions and whether you develop blockages in the arteries of your heart or even if you develop heart failure over time. So it was a time that as we made those connections, I could see that we weren't really thinking about all the complex contextual factors like things within the environment that can affect your risk for developing obesity. And I really was interested in getting more involved in that type of research.
Absolutely. Well, you said something that was really troubling, seeing people at 30 years old developing heart failure. I mean, that's unconscionable. It's bad to develop it even as an older person, but in your 30s, just the degree
Absolutely.
of dysfunction and what you can't do, right?
Mhm.
Talk to me a little bit about how how obesity disproportionately affects the African American community compared to other groups.
Sure. We definitely know from data that we've had for many years that the African American community is disproportionately impacted by high rates of obesity. So we know, for instance, that for African American women, for non-Hispanic Black women in the United States, we have rates of obesity as high as almost 50% of us have obesity.
Wow.
Almost 80% of us have overweight or obesity. And that means our body mass index is at or above 25. And
Mhm.
we know, of course, that the body mass index is not a perfect measure of adiposity or body fat distribution. But unfortunately for African American women, we also have the highest rates of what we call class 3 obesity, meaning our body mass index is at or above 40. And we know
Wow.
once your body mass index is at that rate or at that level, that you're at a significantly higher risk of having a heart attack or heart failure because of obesity.
Absolutely. So we're hearing what I'm hearing you say is that this disproportionately affects Black people and especially Black women. Um,
Absolutely.
is it something about genetics? Is it something about race? Or is it something else?
It's very complex. That's the bottom line. There's so many factors that contribute to high rates of obesity, particularly for African American women. We know, for instance, that there are some biological factors that make you more likely to develop obesity. It relates to what happens when you're in your mother's womb, for instance. So if your mother had diabetes while she was pregnant, then you would be more likely to develop obesity as you are an adult, as you grow, as a child, and as you become an adult. But there are many different environmental factors that also contribute to the development of obesity. Being exposed to neighborhoods that are unsafe, that don't have areas for physical activity, that don't have healthy foods, those are things that also contribute to high rates of obesity. And we know, of course, that because of structural discrimination, structural racism, that the African American community is more likely to be in an area with limited resources. We're more likely to have experienced the effects of segregation, of discrimination, and all of those play a huge role in putting you at risk for the development of obesity.
Got it. So, in other words, you are saying that where you live can relate to your weight.
Absolutely, yes. Your neighborhood has a direct effect on your weight, and there's more and more evidence to show these connections. And in fact, we've seen in studies that when people move to areas that are more safe, that have more resources, we can actually see a decrease in their likelihood of having obesity. So
Well, let's put a pin just right there for a second. You said neighborhoods that are more safe. Explain the correlation between safety and weight gain.
Sure.
Or lack of safety and weight gain.
So there are two ways that safety can have an effect on weight gain. So one way is things that we might typically think of that cause weight gain. So if you're in an unsafe neighborhood, you might feel less comfortable getting outside and doing physical activity. And so that puts you at higher risk of weight gain. The other way, the second way that we don't always think about in how a safe environment or a lack of a safe environment can affect weight gain is the stress that you feel living in an environment, in a neighborhood that's not safe. So if you're always feeling anxious and stressed out about what's happening in your community, if there's a lot of crime in the community, that we know that leads to release of hormones in the bloodstream that actually promote your body to produce to gain weight. To even if you're not eating more or exercising less, you can actually gain weight just because of the release of those hormones.
So anything that basically adds stress to your life, including your ability to feel safe in your home or in your community, that can promote obesity and weight gain.
Absolutely.
Now, research shows that for white women and Hispanic women, socioeconomic factors help to protect against weight gain, right? So the more educated, the more resources and income you have, it's a protective factor against weight gain in those groups. Is that true for Black women? And if it's not, why not?
So there's less of a connection between a socioeconomic status and weight change in Black women. So at a high socioeconomic level, meaning at high levels of income and education, we still see high rates of obesity among Black women. And you're right, we don't see that among white women and Hispanic women. And so there are many different reasons for the fact that we're seeing differences amongst Black women. One reason is, again, those stresses that are unique to unique experiences for Black women, the stresses of discrimination, of racism, those are, again, disproportionately and more likely to happen to Black women. The other thing that differs amongst across groups of women is how what is considered culturally acceptable as far as body size and those types of things. And so there in some cultures, for instance, a larger body size is considered to be a sign of wealth, a sign of prosperity. And so that may be something also that can drive the fact that for Black women, we still see higher rates of obesity, even at high socioeconomic levels.
Got it. So let's switch then to what are some of the unique challenges in addressing obesity and achieving weight loss in the communities that you work in? And maybe you could tell us a little bit about the communities you work in,
Sure.
and then the unique challenges.
Sure. So we've, in my group at NIH, we've been working for several, almost a decade, working to build interventions that target not only obesity, but really cardiovascular health or heart health for African American women in the DC metropolitan area. So we've been working with community leaders, with folks who are living in the communities that are most affected by obesity in DC, to really see if we can design interventions that are based on their input, are based on what they want to see to improve their heart health. And we're starting to implement interventions right now that focus primarily on increasing physical activity for African American women in wards 5, 7, and 8 in DC, as well as in Prince George's County. But
And for people who don't know about wards 5 and 7 and 8 in Prince George's County, who might not be from the DC area, maybe tell a little bit about those areas.
Sure. So those are in Northeast and Southeast DC, and those are the wards are on in Northeast and Southeast DC, and they're right next to Maryland. And so the Prince George's County is the county in Maryland that's connected, particularly towards 7 and 8. And so many of the participants that we work with may be from DC, but have moved to Prince George's County. And there's quite a bit of folks who've lived in both areas. But our target, the reasons why we've targeted those areas is because those are areas where obesity is most prevalent, is highest. It has the highest rates in DC, but it's also those areas that have been most affected by segregation, by discrimination, structural discrimination, and have been areas where African Americans have traditionally been living in the city. And again, these are areas where resources have not gotten to, there have been limited resources for physical activity and diet in many of those areas, at least traditionally, or up until more recently. And so we want to target those who are most vulnerable to the effects of obesity, and who may benefit the most from new interventions to promote improved cardiovascular health.
Great. And I think when you say resources for diet, you might be referring to nutrition deserts.
Yep, things that we would call food deserts, where they might not have the number of grocery stores in those parts of the city as you might have in other parts of the city, or in the
Right.
in the DMV, in the
Right.
Yep.
But there are an abundance
area.
of right. There are abundance of corner stores that carry pork rinds and
Exactly,
the like. Right.
exactly. And we know
Yeah.
these are also areas that they don't have parks that are as well cared for as other parts of the city. Even the sidewalks may not be as walkable or as well cared for and easy to navigate as other parts of the city. So it makes it difficult to do activity in those areas. And so we want to figure out ways that we can try to help women get more active and improve their heart health.
Is there a reason that you focused on Black women as on women, I should say, specifically?
Oh, the focus on women really came from understanding, just even from other studies, that if you're able to change the behavior of women within a family, you really can influence the health of the entire family. So we know that in many ways, women have been most eager and interested in being a part of studies around diet, physical activity, and even obesity.
Hmm. I often call women the CEO of their family's health.
Absolutely. That's a great analogy. Great.
Yeah. So, what strategies have you found effective? What you mentioned physical activity. Can you expound on that and any others that you found that are specifically effective?
So, in terms of what we're doing, we've been focused on how can we use things like mobile technology, things that you might use, like a Fitbit or a mobile app on your phone, and determining how those can be used to increase physical activity. And so we're seeing that the more our participants are using this technology, and the longer that they use them, it can have a greater impact on their levels of physical activity. So we're not completely done with our 6-month study, so we don't have all of the findings, but our goal is to determine if the intervention that we're doing, if it works in this population, can we translate it to other populations around the country, and even to men as well, if there are things that we find that additional things besides using the app and the devices, if we see that those are working to improve physical activity.
So, I know, and I would be surprised if somebody in the audience isn't going to ask this. So I'm just going to jump out there and ask it.
Sure.
What advice do you have for Black women who might be struggling with losing weight and their weight in general?
Well, yeah, I think the first thing I always tell patients and participants, even in our studies, is this is a very complex disease. And so sometimes you may seem like you're making strides and losing weight, and sometimes you're going to have setbacks, but try to be patient with yourself. Try to determine what things you can change as far as diet and physical activity, but also understand that there are other treatments outside of lifestyle changes that can help. We know, of course, and many people have heard about the new medications that are available for treating obesity, things that are in the news like Ozempic and those types of medications. So those are things I always recommend that patients talk to their primary care doctors about. And also, there are options for those who have more severe class 3 obesity. We start to think about bariatric surgery and as an option as well. And we know that is an effective treatment for obesity. But the bottom line is it's a continuum of treatment, and we want to make sure that patients and folks out there know what their options are.
Right. And that it's a disease, not a moral failing, right?
Absolutely right. It is a
Yeah.
complex disease that it's not simple. There's no one size fits all solution for anyone.
And then on the flip side, because we do have some healthcare providers that listen in, how can healthcare providers better support individuals with obesity in managing their weight and health overall?
So for healthcare providers, it's important to recognize that there are factors that affect the treatment of patients with obesity in the clinic. So, for instance, we know that weight bias and stigma exists, that patients with obesity are less likely to get certain treatments because, again, there's this belief that it's more of a moral failure as opposed to a complex disease. And so as healthcare providers, we need to get the training around obesity and what complex factors go into the development of obesity. We need to advocate for improving medical education so that we know that doctors who are coming and providers who are coming behind us are getting the education about the treatment of obesity and again, how complex it is as a disease. And then we need to advocate for our patients that they're able to access the treatments that are out there, but up until recently have many of these treatments, particularly things like the medications, have been cost prohibitive for many patients. And so we need to continue to advocate for insurers to provide coverage for these treatments so that everyone has access to them.
That makes perfect sense. I've also seen some providers start to offer culinary medicine. So cooking classes and teaching about teaching their patients about nutrition. Is that also something that a potentially effective strategy that you've seen both from a heart health standpoint as well as a weight management standpoint?
That's a great point, Dr. Mel. Thinking about the food as medicine movement, really thinking about how do we improve the diet for our patients and help patients who, again, have limited resources, helping make sure we help them get access to healthy diets. And so there have been recent studies that have shown that actually providing food through the and healthy food prescriptions through a primary care can actually improve health outcomes, not just with obesity, but also with diabetes. And so we want to advocate for getting more of that type of work to our providers and into the clinical setting so that we can provide those for our patients.
Wow. Well, I have so many more questions for you, but I'm going to pause here and ask Wayne to come on back in to bring us the word from the street, so to speak, and see what's happening in the chat. Wayne, come on back in.
There you go, Dr. Mill. Great discussion. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
There you go. Great discussion, Dr. Wiley, Powell Wiley.
Oh, you can call me Dr. Wiley.
Dr. Wiley, great discussion. So we have a few things in the chat. And Yvonne Smith asks, what should I do that will affect my community? What should I advocate for that will affect my community?
Great question, Yvonne.
That's an excellent question. So there's so many factors within the community that can play a role in improving obesity rates and reducing the risk of obesity. Probably the one area besides advocating for as much improving the safety of your community or making sure your community is as safe as possible is advocating for housing, affordable, safe housing within your community. Because again, that one study that we know where if you have patients move to housing that is safer, that is has more resources around it for physical activity and diet, we know that we can actually reduce the rates of obesity in those communities.
Wow. You also mentioned earlier, sidewalks and parks as well, that there's a lack of those in wards 5, 7, and 8. So would you also add that to the list as well?
Yep. Yeah, no, it's, anything that can help to provide access to physical activity and make it safer and easier to do physical activity. So if that means, advocating for improving how the parks are, how well the parks are cared for, advocating for fixing sidewalks that are that people can't walk on. They might fall or not feel comfortable walking on. Advocating for a new grocery store in the community, but also advocating so that people know what's happening, they know that those resources for the grocery store are coming to their community, and they can have a say in what's in that grocery store. And because it's not just about putting the resources there, it's actually also working with community members to so that they have a role in shaping them for their needs. That's also very important.
There was a follow-up question to that question in which Yvonne asked, how do we change our grocery stores who continually give us the pork rinds and etc. and the alternatives to unhealthy food? How do we change those grocery stores? What do we do in the community? Who do we see?
So one person to start with is the manager within that store, so they know what concerns you have about what foods are available in the store. I've known of folks who talked to the manager about things that were missing in the grocery store, and they were able to change what was being offered. But if they're not listening to you, the next person I would talk to is your government representative, your council person, your person in local and state government, so that they know that you're not satisfied with the resources that you're getting around the grocery stores in your community. They have a say in what resources are available, and so you definitely want to advocate for yourself as much as possible with government officials.
I would also add to that. It's excellent points. I would add to your local Department of Health. I know in DC there was an initiative called the Healthy Corner Store Initiative, which moved to put fresh produce in along with the pork rinds and everything else, but at least to give people a choice in terms of their fruits, their vegetables, and upping their intake of that by having those available at the corner store, which is sort of an intermediate step to getting the large grocery store to come to the neighborhood, which is going to be a lot more involved. But excellent question.
Right. Very.
I have my own question, and my question is, how do you see? I don't know if you answered this because I asked this, Dr. MEL, because I was doing the technical things of the show. But how do you envision your research informing policy decisions on that level? What do you see for your research? You're in our neighborhoods, and you're doing the best. How do you see this helping all of us?
So my goal with the research that we're doing is really to design effective interventions that are translatable and scalable to other places. So that means if we can find something that works at improving physical activity for women, African-American women in Washington, D.C., especially if we can find something that works even with limited access to resources, we want to see if we can scale that into other cities in the U.S. And even look at, again, scaling it across other populations and see if we can work with men in interventions in addition to women that we're focusing on right now.
Mm-hmm. That's great. Dr. MEL, we have another question.
Mm-hmm.
And we have to come back to it because I can't get it up on camera.
Oh,
I can't read
I have another quick question while Wayne is working on that. So I had kind of touched on it before when I said, is it something about quote unquote race when we're talking about the rates of higher rates of obesity in Black women and Black men? Maybe if you could talk about, is race a real thing, and are there actual traits like obesity linked to being Black? Is it just being, that I'm big boned and that runs in my family kind of thing? Could you address some of that?
Sure. So we want to be clear and think about what race truly is. And we think of race really as it's something that's socially constructed. So it has been used to classify people, but it also has been used for centuries in defining resources and access to resources. And so because it has been used for so long in defining who has access to certain types of neighborhoods, who has access to certain types of jobs, who has access to education, because of all those factors, it really has defined, it really has made it very different in what people experience in our country in particular. So if you think of African Americans who've lived in this country and are descendants of slaves and have experienced all of the limitations on resources related to that, our experiences are very different as compared to other racial and ethnic groups. And because of those differences in experiences, we are and differences in access to resources, we are going to have differences in rates of obesity and other diseases. And so what we really need to think about is how do we have a good sense of many of the differences of what we call the disparities that exist in obesity and other diseases. But we now need to think about how do we address those disparities and provide health to all and really promote equity across populations and really focus on interventions that target health equity and provide the same types of resources for all populations.
Well, that's good to know, because a lot of people might point to the fact and say, well, I'm Black, so, or that person is Black, so therefore, obesity is more accepted or overweight is more accepted. But it has the same negative health consequences. I mean, you've explained brilliantly the fact of, why there are health disparities and how race has been used to justify that. But it's also important to know too that it's not like a sentence. It's not like like you're, because you are Black, that this is necessarily going to be the outcome that you have, right?
Right.
That
Absolutely.
there are factors under your control that you can levers that you can pull, things that you can do. So maybe if you could also talk just on an individual level about specific things that people can do as a takeaway.
Sure. So you're absolutely right. It's not just, my family history. I have, if you have a family history of obesity, you're destined to have obesity. You are at a higher risk of obesity with a family history, but that doesn't mean that there aren't things that can be done to improve and maintain good health for you. And so the things that we that are important to think about as you take care of yourself, this really relates not only to obesity, but also to many other health factors and health issues. It's really about knowing what's going on with yourself. So monitoring your weight, making sure you know where your weight is. We know, for instance, that if you monitor your weight and the food you're taking in every day, and we call that self-monitoring, we know that can actually have can actually prevent weight gain over time, and it can actually help in maintaining weight loss. And so it's important to think about those types of self-monitoring activities as you're thinking about how to take care of yourself. The other thing that's important is to know what your other health markers are. So it's important to know what your blood sugar is, to know what your cholesterol is, and to know what your blood pressure is, because all of those are affected by your weight. But there are excellent treatments out there for all of those issues, and it's important to advocate so that you can get access to those treatments, whether it be medication or again, there are lifestyle treatments that are available, like for instance the diabetes prevention program, which has a is known to be effective in weight loss, but also preventing you from progressing from pre-diabetes to diabetes. And then again, we need to advocate if you're on those medications and things aren't improving, and your weight is still, affecting your health. We need to get you access to, and it's important to advocate for access to the medications that are out there, and then bariatric surgery, that's also a possibility.
Right. So, and you go ahead, Wayne. Yeah.
Go ahead. We got one last question from the audience. Okay. How does obesity affect maternal mortality? Do you have any numbers?
Ooh, great question.
Oh, wow. I wish I had numbers off the top of my head. I don't. I know that it does increase increase mother's risk of having what we call adverse pregnancy outcomes, and that means preeclampsia, gestational high blood pressure, or hypertension or high blood pressure during pregnancy, increases your risk of diabetes during pregnancy. And so those are, it definitely is a risk factor for poor outcomes. But again, it's really about advocating for figuring out what may be happening during pregnancy and advocating for the treatments that you need during pregnancy.
All right. Dr. MEL.
Right. I was just going to add that those things can, as Dr. Powell Wiley said early on, for example, if you have diabetes during pregnancy, that can actually affect the outcome of your baby immediately being born sort of larger than they should be at that age, but also put them at risk for future obesity. So that's another way too that being obese can then lead to risk for high blood pressure, risk for diabetes, risk for blood clots, risk for COVID, all those things during pregnancy, which then can obviously affect the outcome of the pregnancy and for the baby. So excellent question. I just wanted to get one last question in about stress. Any mind-body recommendations that you have in terms of reducing stress and the role that plays in weight gain and eating choices and exercise, the choice to exercise or not?
So the great thing about stress reduction, one of the great ways we can reduce our stress is actually with physical activity. And so by getting more active, by getting your walking, by trying to even, get in 10 minutes here, 10 minutes there, several times a day, you can actually take the time to decompress and reduce your stress. The other big thing too that can improve stress, but also can help with weight loss and with obesity, is sleep. Getting the sleep that you need.
Amen.
I know 7 to 9 hours should be our goal, and I know I'm definitely not good at that, but that's what we really want to strive for every night.
Wonderful. Well, Dr. Powell Wiley, you have been just a wealth of information. Really, really appreciate your being on. Wayne, thank you for those questions. Thank you to the audience for feeding those questions through Wayne to us. As always, fabulous audience and wonderful questions.
We have to go back to what y'all talking about.
Oh, yes, that's right. So is there what are y'all talking about? What y'all think? What is the verdict on medical marijuana before we wrap up?
So before we wrap up, let's go back to the top. Tina Dangerfield says, I have mixed emotions about legalization of cannabis because I don't smoke. Nevertheless, if the pros outweigh the cons, legalize it. But if it doesn't, keep it restricted to people who have health issues such as glaucoma.
Okay.
Dorothy Solomon says, I don't smoke, so I have no opinion.
Okay.
and also I'm looking for Jessica Mayer says too much of anything is not good. Tracy Wall says, I'm all for it now that I'm retired. She's for so
Well, she's
she
not in
doesn't
the
have to
young
get the
men
drug
risk
test
group.
anymore. And once again, Yvonne says legalized marijuana is not the stuff that we did back in the day a long time ago. It's a salve for arthritis, gummies, and drops. That's it. That's what they
All
talk
right.
about, Dr. Mel.
All right. Well, now we know, and it sounds like it's a mixed review. So thank you all. Thank you to the audience. Love to know what y'all are thinking. And before we go, I have to remind you there's still a chance to sign up for the Howard University COVID Resilience Research Study. Participation is voluntary. All you have to do is fill out a 2-part survey about how you coped during the pandemic. And you get reimbursed $100 for doing that. It's totally voluntary, but if you have any interest whatsoever, reach out to Dana Harvey. And the way to do that is to email her at danaharveyresearch@gmail.com. That's Dana, D-A-N-A, Harvey, Harvey, research@gmail.com. Well, that is it for us, y'all. Thank you. Thank you for letting us know what y'all thinking. Thank you to Dr. Tiffany Powell Wiley, who was a fantastic guest. Thank you to my co-host and producer, Mr. Wayne Bruce. And we will see you next week. And until then, remember, be wise, be well, and be health empowered.
I guess I should thank the Robinsons. They invited me. They still don't know. I hooked up with Dave 3 days ago. He'll start coughing tomorrow. And I bet in 10 days he'll be on a ventilator. Now, his wife, she's not vaccinated because she thinks it'll prevent her from being pregnant. But what they don't know is that I can decrease sperm count. Sorry, Dave.